Some things in this world are so dark and so evil that we just don't talk about it. And as a result, there are things that those of us who live our normal lives don't know. Today on Longing for More, we're going to talk about one of those things. And I hope you'll stay with me because it's something that hopefully will never touch your life. But I think it's important that we become aware of it so that we can hopefully help prevent it happening to someone else, or possibly even be aware enough that we could help someone else out of it. We're going to talk about human trafficking. Again, this is a long departure from our normal topic, but I think it's an important conversation to have. If you've listened to past episodes of Longing for More, you know that we talked to the director of Call to Freedom, which is an agency that helps people out of human trafficking. Today, we're going to talk to a woman who has actually been human trafficked. And then we're also going to talk to the woman of our local domestic abuse shelter about what we can do about it. So it's more about education, awareness of what's going on in the world around us so that we can help, hopefully, again, prevent or help someone out of this situation. After the conversation, I just felt so compelled that we want to finish the conversation in next week's episode and have the conversation about where was God when this young woman was being trafficked. And she's going to answer that question in next week's episode. But for today, please just listen and learn how you might be able to make a difference in someone's life. Welcome to Longing for More, where Christians come to strengthen their faith, revive their soul, and learn to live their lives with a sense of fulfillment and peace. Listen each week to learn how to incorporate your faith into your daily activities, stop wandering through life feeling empty and unfulfilled, and begin to live your more. Let's get started. Hey everyone, I have a really special episode for us today. I have with me Kelly Patterson and Sarah Reinhart. And these two women are going to help me share the message about something that I think is hugely important. It's one of those things that I was completely oblivious to until about the last year or so. Anyway, I just wanted to help those of you who, like me, might be a little bit clueless about what's really going on, that dark, evil side of the world we have today. I want to just maybe open the curtains a little bit and help you see some of what's going on. So first of all, Kelly, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're with me today on the show.
Well, my name is Kelly Patterson, and I am a survivor of sex trafficking. I was sex trafficked. The hub was in South Dakota. I've written a book called From Trafficked to Treasured, really somewhat documenting that whole thing and how it was in my life. Wanting to get the message out to people that it happens in the Midwest. And so that's why I'm here today.
Yeah. It's funny because I actually listened to a fellow podcaster's interview with Kelly, and I just was kind of scrolling through wanting to sample. I had just met this podcaster at a conference, and I was scrolling through and wanted to see how she did her show and everything. And it caught my eye that she had this one episode on sex trafficking. And so I'm listening along to Kelly telling her story. And somewhere along there, she said something about being from South Dakota. And I just about fell off my chair because first of all, I didn't understand that was something that was a thing, especially as many years ago, that some of this started for you, Kelly. So that was a God thing. He wanted us to get together. And I'm really grateful that I picked that episode, and I'm really grateful that you're here today. I'm excited to dig into this with you. Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as well? Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you. I am the executive director for Missouri Shores Domestic Violence Center in Kier. We primarily work with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and recently, it's always been something we've worked with, is that intersection between domestic violence and sexual assault, but especially recently, we've really been putting more emphasis on that. because I think it is something that gets kind of looked over a lot of times. So we work with Call to Freedom directly out of Sioux Falls to make sure that we are meeting that intersection and providing extra services for those victims.
Yeah, yeah. And I really appreciate you being here. Actually, you're the one that introduced me to this whole concept at one of the meetings that you held with the Missouri Shores here a little over a year ago. And some of you who are regular listeners will remember that Becky Rasmussen from Call to Freedom was on a previous episode. And if you haven't, you'll want to go back and listen to that. I will have to post the number of that show in the show notes or a link because I'm not remembering it off the top of my head. But anyway, as I mentioned, today I just really want to focus on awareness. I want you as listeners, you, the people that are out in the community, to be aware of the kinds of things that are happening right under our very noses, right here in South Dakota. And I want you to be empowered to maybe be able to make a difference in somebody's life. If we can see this and notice it and report it, I think that literally it could change someone's life. And I want to empower all of you to be aware and help be a part of that. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about, what is human trafficking? What is sex trafficking? How does that look? What does it look like? And Kelly, do you want to kind of start us off with that?
Sure. So there's a variety of forms of sex trafficking, and some of them we're really not going to see in the Midwest. Specifically there, I think of, I have friends who were forced to walk the streets, what we refer to or have heard referred to as red light districts, things like that. We're not going to really see that in the Midwest. The cities just aren't large enough, the population isn't large enough to hide that sort of trafficking. But we have predominantly familial trafficking, which is family members trafficking family members, Romeo pimps, which are boyfriends or husbands, or they pretend to be boyfriends until they have you in, and then they pimp you out. And it could go the other way, because there are males that are also sex trafficked, and I want to make certain to mention that as well. And I know some, and I've met some from this area even. So it happens everywhere to males as well. And then the other one that's predominant in the Midwest is ring trafficking, which is basically organized crime. And it's a very organized, the rings run a bit like the old mob families. And we do have that, and it's very predominant in the Midwest because it's so easy to hide things here. There's lots of miles between things, small communities, everybody trusts everybody. And so we can hide that. And a growing unfortunate form of trafficking in the Midwest is also gang trafficking or motorcycle club or street gangs. We're starting to see some of both. And those are coming to us from other states and other countries, but we're starting to see them in South Dakota. So I know they're seeing them in the surrounding states as well. And that's becoming concerning to me. I've personally worked with a couple of gals who have been trafficked by some very large gangs that I won't even mention their names, but that's concerning to me to see that growing. But ring trafficking is my area of expertise, if you will. I hate to say it that way, but it's what I know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And a couple of things. First of all, I was just really horrified, as I think I've already mentioned, that some of these things act, how anybody could do anything like that. Particularly, I mean, young men, women, or whatever is one thing, but children is a completely another thing. That just really horrifies me. The other thing, though, that I do want to point out right now, for some of us innocents who may be listening, is when we talk about the gang thing and the motorcycles, I'm assuming we can't just jump to the conclusion if we see a bunch of guys riding down the highway that they're going to be into trafficking, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make that clear. But, there sometimes I know that people who ride motorcycles sometimes take a bad rap. You know, they're just really good people. In fact, there's some right here in Pierre that do some really amazing things for the youth in the communities. And so I want to give them kudos for all the good things they do, and not try and take that away from them. So go ahead, Kelly.
If you see a 1% patch on a motorcyclist, then you can know that they're involved in everything bad that has ever been ascribed to motorcycle gangs. That 1% patch means that they are part of the 1% that do raping and pillaging, basically murder, drugs, trafficking, all of it. And they're proud to wear that patch, and they're saying we're not like the other 99%.
Wow.
See, 99% of motorcyclists are fine. We 1%ers proudly wear this patch to say we will do all of that.
I had no idea. That's worth the whole conversation right here, particularly, as I said, because we are going into Bike Week here in South Dakota, and that's something that people really should be aware of. And I'm guessing if you see that patch, you don't want to approach those guys. No way, no how. So very good. Very good. So what are talk a little bit about ring trafficking, Kelly, if you would, and tell us what that looks like. I read your book, and so I have an idea, but I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of people listening today that don't know what that means. So describe that for us a little bit.
Because ring trafficking I compared it to basically a mob style life. And when I think of that, that might be an old term that we use for what we now call syndicated crime. And they're very technologically advanced. They are generally people very high up, whether usually it's a combination of businessmen, philanthropists, government. And we're seeing a lot of that being exposed recently with some of these very big, like the Epstein trial, and a lot of that's going on. When I first started talking about ring trafficking in our state, I found almost no one that knew what I meant except other survivors. Mm-hmm. And as survivors, we use that term very easily without recognizing that other people don't know what that means. Ring traffickers are hidden in plain sight. We oftentimes low life, if I can use that terminology, pimps and lower on the totem pole, they maybe just are only trafficking their fiance, their wife, their significant other, and maybe don't even have any other girls. They're not connected. They don't have all that advanced technology and even training that you're going to find with ring trafficking. And the frightening thing for most people is to recognize that ring trafficking isn't new either. And it's been around before me. It's been around for decades and decades. I don't, of course, know the beginning of when that all started. We're finding and uncovering all kinds of things with the bigger news situations that have been coming up. But we need to recognize that it's right here in our backyard, that there are people that you may interact with every day in your community who are actually a part of a ring and you don't know it. And that becomes the more solemn, serious moment in anyone's life. I have been asked when I speak, do you ever worry that there's someone sitting in your audience who is a member of a ring? And they said, how do you know if there is? And I said, I don't know. And it's possible that every time I speak, there's someone sitting in the audience. And I've had to be aware of that. That's how prevalent it is.
Yeah. So is there a stereotype of what a ring trafficker might look like, or does it kind of cross the board from age, gender, business, anything? I mean, is there a way to spot that?
Unfortunately, no. I guess I could say they're not going to be what we would like to think, the thug next door or something. Instead, we're talking people with means and finances, with ability to connect. We're talking, they can be anything from someone in the judicial system to law enforcement to the medical field to owning a business. I have heard of people that have encountered people, unfortunately, even as clergy that are involved. Now, that is not the same thing as what we have seen exposed, say, amongst some of the Catholic Church with the priests and so on. That isn't the same thing. This is very organized. It's all about money. It's all about control. It's well thought out, well planned. It's been handed down generation to generation, very much like any of the mobsters that came over from Italy. And, we think of the movie The Godfather and so on. They're connected like that with one another across the nation. And I know for certain, they're also connected outside of our country as well. But they do run their own they have like a little empire. This is what I know from my experience. How big this goes, I can't tell you. But I know that I had smaller communities where my personal experiences began of being groomed as a small child. But as we moved, because of my father's job, moved us frequently, I soon ran into what was really the state hub. And there I encountered and met individuals who oversaw these other rings. Now, I think of them as little rings that are under a bigger ring. And then I soon found they were a part of an even bigger ring where I met a gentleman who was very obviously in charge, and over everyone bowed to this man coming out of Minneapolis. And who did he bow to? I don't know.
Wow. So your story goes back a long ways. I mean, this isn't something that just happened in the last few years. So, and I know that there are, having read your book, you don't remember all of it. Fortunately, your mind has probably prevented you from remembering some of it, and God is good that way, I'm sure. So, but how young were you from your earliest memory of this going on? Probably not even realize what was going on at the time, but about how old do you think you were?
Well, in my book, I mention age 6 being introduced to the ring. I do have memories I didn't write about that were much earlier, around age 4. And there was a member of the ring that I recall some molestation during that time. But at age 6, I had someone close to the family who was actually the head of one of the smaller rings. I can't tell you how large his area was, but I certainly know the next city we moved into, he was still the person in charge. But it wasn't, I shouldn't call it a city, it was a small South Dakota community. The first several were.
So basically, it just started out as molestation, and just. That's not a word that fits in that sentence, does it?
It kind of does.
Yeah, and
I use it too.
Progress from there. How, I think part of the reason that it seems so unbelievable is that, I mean, you were living your life. I mean, from the people that were in your life, this stuff was happening to you and they had no idea, right? So how does that happen? How can a ring get a young person or an older person, whatever, anybody in their circle, without the rest of the world knowing about that?
You know, I'd like to explain that or answer that question in a way I haven't done before, but it's something I've been thinking about. So I almost would invite people listening to close their eyes and imagine this scenario. Specifically, if you've lived in a small community at all, anywhere in the heartland of the USA. And by that, I mean anything population, say 7,000 and under, but we have so many communities that, are just a few hundred people. And imagine the everyday picture here. Everybody knows everybody. The homes are unlocked, vehicles are not locked. Nobody questions spending the night at someone's home because everyone interacts. Everyone trusts everyone for the most part. They certainly don't expect anything as big as ring trafficking in their backyard. And so you interact at the grocery stores and at yard parties and any kind of community events. Pretty much everyone is always around. Your children are trusted with each other. At school age, and this is the picture that it's one that haunts me really. In small communities, we have a siren that goes off to tell us it's noon, the lunch siren, and then there's the 6 p.m. siren that goes off to tell you it's dinner time. And this is something that most people in the Midwest can really relate to. That siren is a haunting sound to me, that dinner bell, because you trust your child to school, just as my parents did. And I walked to school, it was just across the street. And I walked up through this long playground and I went into school just like every day. Attend class, school gets out between 2:30 and 3, depending. So let's just say you get out at 3 o'clock. Most days, when that school bell rings and school is out, I would go then and play with friends. I wasn't expected to be home yet. My parents were working. I was expected to be home when that siren goes off, to be heading home that moment. So I had roughly 3 hours of free time almost daily, with the exception of days where, there was a chore or something to do at home. And most of the time, I'm just playing in the neighborhood or over at a friend's house, depending on the time of year. But just kind of enjoying the freedom of a small community. But then there were the days where the ring would summon me, and I had already been groomed. So being summoned was real easy. It was a matter of simply being told to show up. There was a very specific building that they used. And I'd show up, and so would other children. But nobody's paying attention. It's all being done clandestine. And you go in and you suffer untold confusion of the mind because of the sexual abuse where they combine pleasure and emotional pain and terror. And when you have those things all happening at once, it confuses the brain of a little child. And it also puts you into a place of a lot of mind control. And when that 6 o'clock siren goes off, that's the sound that calls you back into who you ordinarily are. That says, walk home, be you, nothing's happened. it was for me like almost a switching signal. You're no longer there. You're walking home. You had a great day, just like every other day. And that's how the mind begins to train itself to something as simple as a dinner siren, to shut off, switch, and live normal. And so then family has no idea that there's been anything wrong going on during those 3 hours.
Wow. You know, I was there. I was with you all the way until you got to that crucial turning point. You described the town that I grew up in. And Sarah's shaking her head, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's one of those things where I think as parents, there's got to be, there's a part of us that doesn't want to believe that that kind of evil exists in the world. So I'm guessing even if there were signs, there was probably a part of them that just wanted to believe that that couldn't be and not go there. So, wow. Thank you for sharing that. That was a very powerful example of how that happens. And I think just, in the interest of, I could visit all day and learn more and more. And I know that, that's another story for another day. We definitely can explore that further because folks, we are going to have Kelly back to tell her specific story and how God got her through that story. But like I said, that's another story for another day. Right now, what I'd really like to do, and again, I just appreciate you sharing that, but is so, we've talked about, the different forms of trafficking and, there's the familial and the Romeo and the ring and the gang and all of that. What kinds of things? So people are now aware that this is happening. This is real. This is South Dakota. As we go into the final months of summer, and I'm assuming this is all year round. We're focusing on this right now because there's a national day to acknowledge it on June 30th. And we're talking about it now because the rally is coming and it's coming to South Dakota with the rally, but this happens all the time. So what kinds of things, and Sarah, we are going to give you an opportunity to talk. I appreciate your patience with us. What kinds of things should people be looking for, those red flags to go, wait a minute, something's not right here. This should be explored further. And I'm going to let you start, Kelly, and then Sarah, I'm going to ask you to help us with that as well.
Yeah. I'll give some personal ones, and then I'd love for Sarah to share also. Personally, one of the key signs, I think, is exhaustion in a child. The child should naturally have a lot of energy. And while I had a lot of energy, I also had this extreme exhaustion. I was referred to as sickly. And I just seemed to catch everything. And I was sickly and even hospitalized at age 6, and it was at the end of being 6 years old. And I believe without question, looking back now, that even that hospitalization, and I was so deathly sick, was very much a result of what had been happening to me, and it had just broken me down. And when you internalize all that and you have nowhere to expel it, so that is a big one. And a real big part of my story, but I'm not going to go into all of that, is to watch for what we used to always refer to as teenage rebellion. Oh, they've just hit that age and they're just being rebellious. Children I believe, don't naturally want to necessarily be rebellious. Now, you might say differently when you have a 2-year-old, but as you get older, you don't naturally just want to be a rebellious teen or not getting along with authority figures and so on. But when you see someone in that cycle, we really need to begin to look at it differently and think they're at that age. where traffickers are very interested. Or in my case, they're interested in stepping up what they're doing because you're hitting an age that they consider very sexual. And they're not as worried about damage and so on to the person physically, because rings are always looking to hide what they do. But as you age, of course, it's a little easier to hide things. And they know by a certain age, they've got you groomed and terrified enough that you're going to hide at all costs what's going on. So a natural rebellion is going to come out of, or unnatural, is going to come out of someone who has had to live a life like I have and so many others, where you are just so angry and so wounded. And rebellion is a way to express it without saying, without speaking why. And I could tell you, if you would have asked me, I wouldn't have understood why. I can remember so many times just questioning myself. Why am I such a black sheep? Why do I always go that way? And I never had an answer for myself because I was hiding too much.
I think that's a really good point too. I know I didn't pull the statistics out, so I don't have them right in front of me. But if you look at statistically speaking, especially when teenage girls run away from home, I believe it's over 50% are experiencing some sort of abuse inside of the home. So they're not necessarily doing it to rebel or because they're seeking that independence, which seeking independence as a teenager is completely normal. When they're running away from home or they're abusing drugs or drinking, things like that, it's usually a major indicator that there's something else going on in the home. Not necessarily trafficking, but some sort of abuse is occurring.
Well, it would be interesting to see what that number is. I will declare that I did run away when I was in high school, and none of that was going on. So, I think it's important to, it's like we want people to be aware, but we don't want people to just assume that any one of those symptoms or signals means that that's happening. It's just a trigger to be aware, right?
Yes. And if maybe somebody's seeking their independence or they run away and they go stay at a friend's house, something like that, that's not necessarily an indicator. It's when they're repeatedly running away or they are running away with the intentions of not being found. If they're gone for weeks and it's not that, they were kidnapped, they just wanted to get away, that's usually the biggest indicator.
Good distinction there. Yes. Thank you for that. So do we have any idea of the number of people that are trafficked in South Dakota at any given time? No,
I don't have that. I know it is a lot, especially with the intersection in Sioux Falls of I-90 and I-29. That intersection is a major trafficking hotspot because I-29 goes from Canada to Mexico and I-90 goes all the way across the United States. So that's a huge spot for people to be funneled through without anybody ever knowing.
Sure.
And I-90 itself. I have a good friend who was on a task force before the mainland of the USA had really thought much about it. We didn't have a name for it. We certainly didn't have the terminology like trafficking. And he was on a task force for sex trafficking in Hawaii. And even then, they recognized I-90 in the center of South Dakota. So just kind of in the middle of nowhere. As a place for exchange. They would come from Hawaii and they were coming sometimes from overseas. We were exchanging, sending people from mainland US to Hawaii and then over to other countries, etc., and back and forth. But they all recognized the center of South Dakota as an exchange place for the East and West Coast. So I found that to be very interesting. And it also sort of explained a lot of my experiences and the experience of others in this state, where we have seen things to be so advanced, so beyond what we expect to be happening in South Dakota. A lot of effort and time and money and very influential people from other states and even nations that come to this state for the purpose of being involved with sex trafficking. That is, I think, an unusual and a not very well-known fact. And if we can wake up to a lot of the other signs as well, I think we've mentioned quite a few of them, but if you wouldn't mind, I would like to mention a few more.
Yes, and I wanted to get back into that. Yes, please.
I think about how sexualized my behavior was and my dress. And I was constantly battling my parents about the way I dressed. And I had come to believe that my body was who I was. And of course, I came to believe that very young. So once I began to develop, then I wanted to, unfortunately, dress in ways that were more sexualized. And of course, my parents were fighting that with me all the time. And, you know, back then, we're talking before cell phones, and, you know, there was nobody teaching even good touch, bad touch. So my parents had literally nothing to base my behavior on, except they assumed teenage, you know, rebellion. If we see, and this was another issue I had very severe sleep issues and nightmares. And I didn't let my parents know how often I was awake at night, but they certainly knew about some of the nightmares. They definitely saw the growing insecurity and self-hatred that I had. I didn't come off as self-hatred so much as, well, just insecurity probably is more what they saw. I'm thinking about the difference between what was inside and their view. And their view would have probably been, you know, why are you so insecure? You're a cheerleader. You know, you've always got a boyfriend. You're in the popular crowd. You know, I'm sure they were questioning what, you know, these things didn't add up, but there was no training to tell them, well, the reason these things don't match is we need to look deeper into this person's life and find out what is going on there. I had a lot of nervous energy at the same time, that extreme exhaustion. So I always like to think about a pendulum. And I'm actually finishing writing a facilitator manual and a workbook for support groups called the pendulum, because there is such you're either way over to the right or over to the left, and I'm not talking politics, but you know, you might be that person that did like I did and dress very seductively, or the opposite is the girl with turtlenecks up to, you know, right up to her chin and sleeves all the way down to her, you know, over her fingers, and her clothes are really baggy. She's trying to hide her body. And it can go either way, just depending on how it influenced you, what lies you believed, what was going on. Tattoos are another thing. We have so many tattoos today, but if we're talking about what to watch for, say you're at a gas station, you know, there are certain tattoos, and you can Google them, that are huge indicators. Barcodes are a big one. Anytime you see a bag of money, a dollar sign, or diamonds, crowns, those are real good indicators of tattoos that are related to sex trafficking. And of course, the names of certain males, that's the smaller time pimps. They like to put their names out there on their girls. But the tattoos are getting bigger and more brazen. I've worked with survivors now who have had one gal, I'm just thinking of it, was from her knee to her hip, and it surrounded probably 2/3 of her leg, was one entire tattoo, all built around money, diamonds, crowns, and the name of her pimp. And it was forced on her to have that. And the work to cover that is just huge. You know, but it can be done, thankfully. But boy, they're just getting like they're not even afraid. And maybe it's because they're in the Midwest.
Interesting. So rally's coming, and we know that they're bringing trafficked women and probably men into South Dakota. So I'm driving across the state on my family vacation, and I pull into a quick shop or a rest area or something. What kinds of things should I have my red alert sign out looking for or be aware of if I see something that would be like, oh man, Sarah, I think this might be where you can help us out. Tell us what should give us a second look.
So I would be looking for any kind of women, young girls, men, whatever, who seem really skittish, or they're not really sure about themselves, or, you ask them questions and they automatically look at one person, kind of almost like they're seeking guidance about what they should do, how they should answer, that sort of thing. Women, men who don't have their own personal possessions, so their IDs, their money, if they defer to somebody else to carry those things for them. If by chance you get them separated somehow and you ask them questions, they might become very offensive or defensive, almost aggressive, and it's usually just kind of a security measure so that that person doesn't necessarily ask those questions, they don't get found out, they don't get in trouble, that sort of thing. If it looks like they have, different injuries that may or may not be visible, a lot of times they're smart, the injuries might not be visible, but if you see any kind of bruises or things like that, if they just act like they've been abused, if it looks like they've been denied food, water, sleep, things like that, as Kelly has been saying, very exhausted, sometimes sickly because trauma lives in the body and it makes you sick. Those are the things that you should be looking for. I would say one of the biggest indicators is just somebody who defers to another person to make their decisions for them.
And I would assume even just kind of like one of the things I read it somewhere or whatever, but it's kind of like, if there's a man with several young women with them,
Mm-hmm.
or a huge age difference or different nationalities or things like, things that just doesn't look like the traditional family setting, right? Not again that's always the case, but that would be something to watch for these other symptoms if you see, right?
Yes, absolutely. If it looks like there's one person in charge of a group of people who all seem very submissive and very, defer all their decisions to that one person, I think in any regular setting, that's going to be a warning sign, but especially when it comes to trafficking.
Yeah. And I think
the opposing is also true, where you have, I'm still upset that I didn't turn this in because we still didn't really have a term for it. So, but there was a situation several years ago. I was at a gas station in Colorado and I saw a situation, and this was real common for myself. So I recognized it, and I wish I would have turned that in at that moment. It's one of those that you go away and you pray and pray and pray that God makes it right, because I just didn't trust my gut. But looking back, I know what I saw. And that was one girl, and she did have the right tattoos, or the wrong, as I'd rather prefer to say. And she had two guys. And as she went down one aisle in this gas station, she had each of the guys were on the aisles running alongside of her, walking as slow as she did, looking over the top at her the whole time. She's walking with her head down, looking terrified. And they are herding her towards the restroom, where she is to go in and get her business done and talk to no one. And she better not talk to anyone in the restroom, because they're standing close enough to hear if there's conversation. And that is a really common scene. Or it can be another female watching other females, because if you've got one who's been trained long enough, she's not going to do anything to cross them. She's been tortured enough. Torture is very much a part of trafficking of any kind. Across the board, it's almost as though they've written a book on torture techniques, and they all use it. And almost all, nothing's 100%, but I'm shocked and surprised still every time I run into someone who has suffered the same torture techniques that I have, even though they may be from another state, another country, whatever the situation. And so if you've got someone tortured enough, she's going to literally narc on that other girl if she interacts with people. And so they may just have another female watch another female.
So, and yeah, that's really helpful to be aware of too. Another one that I think I read somewhere was kind of that scenario where they may be traveling together and in a hotel, and it's like, the guys are smart enough now not to bring her or them in with him to check in. But if you're staying in a hotel and you realize that there's a lot of coming and going in the room next door or whatever, that could actually be something to watch out for and be aware of. So what I would like to do is now shift to the next logical place, I believe, and that is it. Sarah, I want you to talk a little bit about that follow your gut. Kelly already just hinted at that a minute ago. I want you to talk about that, and then what people should do if they have that sense that Kelly just said. I wished I would have reported it. How can they? What kinds of things can people do to respond to that?
Mm-hmm. I really do think that trusting your gut is the most important thing. It's super easy to see something that makes you uncomfortable and just kind of like look the other way because you want to be comfortable. But in order to enact any kind of serious change, I think that we need to put ourselves in that uncomfortable situation of saying, she looks like she's really afraid of him. He's really watching her. He's following her. She doesn't have her own ID or her own money. Something's just really weird. And that's where you have to step up and you have to, you can make an anonymous report to local law enforcement and say, this is what I saw. It just didn't sit right with me. I think somebody should go over and look at it. If you're not comfortable with local law enforcement, there's a national human trafficking hotline. There's a texting line. There's all sorts of different resources that you can use just to report that and make sure that you at least do something. In other instances, it doesn't hurt if it's possible, and I would never say put yourself at risk, but if it's possible to get her by herself and just say, do you need help? Are you safe? And, maybe she's not probably going to say anything, but at least then she knows like, hey, somebody noticed this and there's somebody that is potentially looking out for me, and give them a little bit of hope as well. Obviously making sure that you never put yourself in danger, but it's so important if you see something to say something.
Yeah. And I know Call to Freedom right now has posters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the rally and things like that, where, they just have the tag where it's just the phone number because they wouldn't ever want them to get caught with something. But I mean, there are things out there that are trying to get those people who are being trafficked attention to let them know that there is help available to them. So very good. We will put those numbers in the show notes for the show. You guys, this is powerful stuff. And, all of the words I've used before, it just makes me want to sit down in a puddle and cry that anybody could treat another human being this way. But we know that it's happening and we need to do what we can. And honestly, some of us, all we can do, and again, it's not a just like we talked about before, but the most powerful thing we can do is to pray and pray that that the evil will stop, that God will protect these people who are being trafficked and help them find a way out and know their value and their identity in Him. So I just really want to thank you guys for coming today. And I guess just one last opportunity. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you guys feel? I'm going to start with you, Kelly. Is there anything that you feel that we should leave our listeners with today?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand a specific number, and we don't have an exact, but we're real close. And that is that statistically, only between 1% and 2% of sex trafficked individuals escape alive. That means the other 98 to 99% are dying in that life. And that ought to be a wake-up call. This is a Holocaust happening, and it is growing out of control. It is the fastest growing, if we can call it a business, the fastest growing trade, certainly, next to drug trafficking. And it is quickly, I believe, going to surpass drug trafficking if something isn't done. Many of your drug traffickers are switching to sex trafficking, or they're at least beginning to include it because it's so lucrative.
That's a horrifying statistic, and I just want to tell you that I'm really glad that you were in that 1 or 2%.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sarah, any last thoughts from you?
I know it's really on the forefront of everybody's mind with Rally, and I know in the springtime the pipeline is scheduled to start construction, and anytime there's large gatherings of males is when the trafficking really goes up, but we have to be vigilant for it all year round. I know it's really at the forefront, but it's something that happens 24/7, 365, and we really have to make sure about that. And we really need to, like I said, make ourselves uncomfortable when we see those things to put an end to this, because humans should not be for sale, and women, men, children should never be treated the way that trafficking victims are. So
yes, thank you for that reminder. I couldn't agree more. So ladies, this has been so beneficial just for me to be aware of even more what's going on. And I think it's important that we use our voices to bring to attention to this horrible thing that's happening in our world. So thank you both so very, very much. I am just really blessed to have you here. So thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know about you, but a really big part of me wishes that I had never learned about this atrocity that's happening in our world. But the reality is that it's there and we have learned about it. I just want to read to you from Ephesians 5, starting in verse 10. Try to find out what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, rebuke and expose them. It is shameful even to talk about the things that ungodly people do in secret, but when the light shines on them, it becomes clear how evil these things are. The reality is, folks, that if we don't speak out against these horrible things, our silence may be interpreted as approval. God needs us to take a stand for what is right. We must lovingly speak out against these things that are happening to our innocent children and youth and even adults in this world. We need to speak out, and we need to seek opportunities to help where we can. So with that, I'm going to just say thank you so much for stopping by today. I know how precious your time is, and I also know that this was a hard one to listen to. I do hope that you'll come back next week and hear Kelly's story of how she survived going through the years of this sex trafficking that she did survive, and how God helped her through it. And it's a message of hope that many people out there need to hear. So again, thank you for stopping by. I'll talk to you next week. And in the meantime, share this with someone who may need to hear this message, and go. Be blessed, stay safe, and live your more.